Good luck. Puts on the step, goes right through, puts on the step again. Oh, go pretty. That was magnificent stuff. Well, they shall not believe them. Marshall skips away. Marshall's still going. Mullins opens up again. Oh, look at him go. He beats O'Davis on the outside.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Voluntary Tackle. I assume the last time, if you have tuned into us before and you haven't dropped off, that not a lot's happened since the last time we recorded, lads, I don't think. I mean, it was only a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it, Mario?
Very recent.
Like that. I think we're talking about something that happened in March, and then I got really drunk and I woke up naked with fairy floss around my genitals, and now I've just sort of went, well, how about we do a pod? And it's finals time. That's what's happened in that amount of time. So, look, I don't think we can catch up on everything that's happened in the season, and nor should we, because we're not, in a position of expertise to do that. But also, it'd be a fucking long podcast. So instead, I think we should start, Xander, with the devil in the room, with the gaping wound that is last week's game against South. Obviously, we're Roosters fans. I say that every episode like no one knows. There's only 9 of you. You know that already. But I don't know how you're dealing with it, but I have not dealt well with what happened. People have come up to me and go, did you enjoy the game at least? And I don't think it was a game. I think it was more a street brawl, and I'm not looking for any kind of resolution with the loss. I just want maybe a victims of crime report done, some kind of reparations, because it feels like, we were assaulted last week, and I'm not happy about it. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it was frustrating, to put it very, very mildly. I mean, it was a rough game to watch, to be honest, just because there were people constantly going down injured. I don't think anyone was trying to tackle below, the jawline, particularly George Burgess.
Very rare when you see a referee go,
Tom Burgess, sorry.
Boys, try to keep it below the eye line.
Yes.
That's not normally a directive that, Ashley Klein would have to give.
The sin bin it bounced off the ball. He literally hit the guy there, but then it bounced up. So
the sin bin? There were 90 of them.
I mean that Tom Burgess one.
Right, okay. Which one?
Yes.
Didn't
The first one.
Leading with the elbow into Crichton's face as well.
Yeah. Look, let's start here, right? I think this is an interesting kind of philosophical divide in the game, because I spoke to a lot of people after the game. They spoke to me. I didn't speak to them. Fucking, I still am in mourning. But they insisted on speaking to me about it. And I think the thing that seemed to come back at me was, geez, it was an entertaining game, though. And I heard that a lot.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's my own biases here, because we lost. But I actually thought it was a shit game. Like, it was a really interesting spectacle, but it was a shit game.
I'm not sure I've ever enjoyed a game when Manly's lost. I don't look at the 2013 grand final and think, geez, that was a hell of a game. I just think, fuck, we lost.
Okay, because you're a real one-eyed partisan man like that.
And it'd be interesting to know that actually, how other people perceive it, because I obviously thought, for me, the pinnacle of the season was actually the Roosters Storm game from the week, the round,
which was brutal as well.
Which was a brutal game, but it wasn't interrupted by constant penalties and
AVOs and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like it was a game where the players were left to kind of sort it out more. Yeah. Whereas I felt like in the South Roosters.
Okay, Joey.
But it was right. It felt more like that game felt more like an Origin where the refs kind of just let it go a bit. And obviously we won, so I preferred it.
But it didn't feel violent. Was the difference? The difference was JWH and Turgis were just trying to take everyone's heads off, and then other players joined in.
That was another difference as well. It was incredibly confrontational and aggressive, but the semi against South felt kind of dirty.
Yeah,
by comparison, it felt like that sort of famous. Manly Sharks game from the 60s they often talk about.
Jeez, how old are you, mate?
But I wasn't alive.
I can remember this in the bloody Menzies era.
I wasn't alive for it, but I have watched the footage from it, and there was that. It was a scrappy out there to bash each other affair, and it was a grind.
I thought the same thing. It felt very early 1960s.
But I think an important difference is, yes, it was aggressive and it was over the top, and the players did go too far, but at least it was face-to-face aggression. It still wasn't Melbourne Storm era, I'm going to break your leg while you're looking the other way, or this hip drop, that sort of shit. You weren't doing that. The worst thing that happened in that game was JWH slamming someone's head into the ground got away with it, no harm done apparently. But anyway, but that was the only thing that you'd call kind of a bit dirty. Everything else was at least I'm looking in your face as I hit you in the face. Like it was at least honest aggression.
This is an interesting moral code you have,
Yeah.
Mario. So you don't mind if, for example, a stranger on the street gets a spanner and whacks you over the head, as long as they do it like to your face and sort of bid you farewell
Well,
as
it's
they
the
leave.
difference between someone punching you in the face in a fight and a coward punch.
You
There
can,
is an
coward, you
important
can coward
difference.
punch someone in the nose, I think. Because if you haven't entered into the rules of engagement
If
of
they're
the
a
fight,
blind man,
well, exactly. There's a loophole for a start, Mario. All right, so let's really let's unpick this argument in front of us, shall we?
I'm just looking for an excuse to say Roosters Storm. Roosters South. It might have been bad, but it's still not the Storm. I always have to bring it back to the
Well,
Storm.
okay, well, let's pick it up here, Mario, because I know that you were explaining off air just how hard your penis was at the news of both the Storm and the Roosters exiting the competition. Obviously, that displeased me, but you're not a fan of either club. As a person that doesn't have a club in the finals, sorry, I didn't mean to laugh as I said that. I really didn't. It just sort of came out. How do you feel about those two teams, which it's probably fair to say have dominated final series over the last decade? Are you feeling as though this is a fresh chapter in NRL and you want to see some other teams duke it out for a change?
Very much so. I mean, out of the going into this round, out of the 5 teams the 6 teams, I don't count the Panthers, out of the 6 teams that were left, I just was happy as long as the Panthers don't win. And I never had an issue with the Panthers really until last year after they won, and their fans have just gone completely feral, and they're trying to top the Sharks fans post 2016 for just how insane they are. But the difference is Panthers have this absolute sense of entitlement because they've kept winning. The Sharks did not. And so I just find myself hating the Panthers. There's other reasons, and I've gone into it in other forums where there's lots of other reasons.
You digital hussy.
you kind of knew that the Sharks weren't going to sustain it. Like that was a lightning in a bottle moment where they just had everybody come together at the right time.
And their level of gronkishness was just intense, and it was impressive in hindsight.
But yeah, and you know, I never felt bad about them for that. And with the Panthers, I think it is different though, because they have this incredibly rock solid foundation. They have probably the strongest base of development of any other club in the game. You know, they have demographically the most fertile sort of ground as well. Like, I mean, you know, the rest of the competition, it's a little bit more challenging developmentally, whereas that part of the city, that's where the rugby league players come from.
Whereas the Sharks just have a particularly good competition running out of the Yarrawarra chip shop, which isn't quite the same length and breadth of the junior system.
I find myself, I'll go for any team where Gus hasn't been involved because I hate him getting secondhand glory. I don't want the Panthers winning and him saying, "Oh, this is because of me," because he will. Because then if the Bulldogs go well next year, he's taking the credit.
He doesn't do it so obviously. He's very artful in the way he says, "Look, I've seen these young kids play, and Jesus, you know, we did a good."
Yeah.
You know, he takes credit in a very oblique kind of way.
Oh, he's not as subtle as he thinks he is. That's the thing. He's not. He does it to sound subtle, and it works. It gets past the great unwashed fans. Those that actually
that's our listeners. I think you're talking to as well. The
How
great
dare you
unwashed.
personally abuse them
no,
like that?
that's only Giannis. You know, he could
Shout
do
out
with a shower.
Giannis. Oh, I know you're not here, Giannis, but it feels like it's been too long in between drinks. But no, that's an interesting thought process there. I know I've had quite a few beers, so if I just go completely off tether, I'm going to blame the alcohol. Should we tell the listeners where we were before we flicked on the microphones? I mean, this is a wonky edition of the Voluntary Tackle. Let's be wonkier than normal. But we did have quite a few. I had quite a few refreshments at the pub before we came here. Unfortunately, the AFL was on, and we got a little bit sucked into that.
Speak for yourself.
Well, I did, yeah. I mean, you know, Mario was going on about his PBs in marathons and things like that, and I was just looking over his shoulder, and I go, "Geez, that Swans game's getting pretty close," and it ended up being a point. But I think that just tells you the level of intoxication that I'm at, because I actually found myself, I wouldn't say enjoying the game, but sort of at least paying attention to AFL.
Yes, but for context, it's very important to note that the reason we were interested is, even though at least you and I, Eamon, would say that we'd cheer the Swans over other teams in theory, but the pub where we were was filled with these suited, let's say, yahoos, just to sound really old, and they were cheering the Swans like it was life and death, like it was a real game of sport, not that crap in a Sydney pub being watched. And they were so into it that I found myself wanting the Swans to lose just to see the sadness on their faces.
Yeah, no, I was disgusted. I know, do you feel the same, Xander? I actually felt a visceral disgust. I threw up in my mouth at times.
Well, it was two things for me. I mean, they'd clearly come from the races, which also bothers me.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's
fuck,
right.
fuck horse racing.
That's because he got cheated out of the funds in a knackery one time. That's nothing to do with the ethical treatment of animals, but go on, Xander.
No, it's more just I find horse racing incredibly boring. And I don't
Okay,
understand
well, there's
the
that
appeal of
too. Yeah. Occasionally a jockey will fall off and sustain fatal injuries. Then it's kind of exciting. But
Yeah,
I'm with you.
can't we eat the jockeys and that? I know we can't eat the horses, but let's eat the jockeys.
I think
I don't
that's
think
where
there's much meat on them.
that's where the
problem.
equilibrium needs to be struck. I think people that have a bit of a problem with the animal welfare issues around racing. If we at least seen half and half, jockeys and horses, two factories to be made for things like dog food.
Yeah, or
and-
maybe the horses should be eating the jockeys when the jockeys fall off and die.
Oh yeah, that's probably.
I mean, I can't see any problem. I'm sure that the cows of England wouldn't suggest there was anything wrong with that happening.
Should I segue back to Phil Gould? Now, I agree with you. He is somewhat of a demagogue, isn't he? And I've noticed when I've observed his body language, fellas, that he does have a way about him that suggests he can never be wrong. It's this kind of unusual circular language that does get on my goat.
And he'll take 7 different angles and then just crow about the one that happens to be right.
Yeah, exactly. Have we got to the bottom of why he only uses singular with the mascots?
I think it's just to annoy people.
Okay,
think so,
well, it's fucking worked.
Like,
Shits me.
I have this theory that he basically started doing it just to save on characters on Twitter so he could, get a slightly longer tweet.
Yeah.
But then people started commenting on it, and he just thought it was funny. Which, to be honest,
I respect that. I respect him being a shit stirrer, which he often is. Thing
Because
is,
you're one of the best, Mario.
It's frustrating because so much of what Gus does when he's on Twitter, quite a lot of his content will be good, and then he'll just come out with some stupid dinosaur crap like, saying, concussions aren't real, basic. Like, effectively, he had that conversation the other day with Andrew Ferguson, and he just ended up just abusing Andrew Ferguson, who was being quite calm and reasonable, much like...
Is this on Twitter?
Yeah, much like bloody Braithen Astor with old mate Alan Roosters fan the
Who's
other
Andrew
day.
Ferguson?
From RL Project.
You know the Rugby League project that does
Yeah.
all those stats?
Yeah, right.
He's the guy behind that. And he's
Okay.
also got a pod as well. I
Yeah,
don't know
okay.
if he still have a pod.
He may.
I've been out of that loop for a while, but
I mean, to be fair, like on the concussion issue, I mean, one of the things that he brings up, I'm not familiar with his back and forth with Andrew Ferguson, but one of the things he often says is that, you're dealing with a lot of concussions that happen from players who are the tacklers, and that's actually true.
Yeah, it
and
is.
that's that is one thing that nobody's been able to square that circle. How do you punish the players who are going into tackle? Like, how do you mitigate against that with a penalty?
Victor Radley's tackle the other day.
Yeah, and like
I think it's penalty enough when you spasm.
But you know what I mean? I mean, if they're encouraging players, and this is the point that he made, is like a copybook tackle is really sort of meant to go, sort of the middle of the chest and drive upwards, and then if that goes wrong, then you can kind of hit them in the jaw. But if you go around the waist and you get it wrong, then it's the hip bone to your head and you're out.
Yeah, exactly. There's
And,
no
and,
second
and it's a
chances.
game where sidestepping is
Yeah.
such an important thing. And if you have to lower your head, you're lowering your range of vision. You can't react to that sidestep, and then your head is just a target.
So if you're punishing head highs to the point where you over incentivize just waist tackles, then you're going to just see statistically you're likelier to have a higher number of hip tackles.
And the worry is that maybe they're
concussions.
worse.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of things happening, right? So there's and I think Phil Gould's right on this, and that some agency and responsibility needs to be actually borne by the ball carrier and the way they're training ball carriers, i.e. backing into the defence to drive through the line, which is an effective way to do it, which puts you in crusher positions and things like that. But the other part is also 3 men in the tackle. Then this is a bit of an elephant in the room, but I think a lot of that head placement error that you're talking about around the hip region is complicated quite a lot by 3 men coming in. They're trying to fit in this very small margin of error at high speed, right? With them, usually they're kind of simultaneously coming in as the third guy, right? That margin of error being so small, of course, it's going to go wrong from time
And
to
they're
time.
large humans.
They're large humans, and the hip bone takes no prisoners, right?
Yeah.
We've watched enough footy to know that if you've connected with the hip bone, that's in Category 1, you're gone. Like we all know, you might get away with it with an elbow, you might get away with it a knee,
Or an origin.
you're in origin, but you will not get away with it when it's a hip bone. You're gone.
It's like a shoulder charge to the face, basically.
Yeah, it's a
Like,
fucking hard bone to the body. It's just physics, right? And often when they're coming in, they're in a crouched position, and it's hitting them around the temple.
Yeah.
You're Gonski.
I mean, right now, feeling my hip bone versus feeling my shoulder blade, and the hip's harder.
It definitely
As
is.
simple as that. It's
It kind of needs to
harder.
be. It's doing a hell of a lot of work down
Of course
there.
it is.
So potentially, if you're talking about how to manage this issue,
It's more like the elbow.
maybe, and I want to throw it out to the table. I feel like this is old times. How do we feel about the idea of not having 3 men in the tackle at all?
Or
How do you enforce
yeah,
that?
I mean, because if it gets to the try line and they're still driving with 2, do you say no? You can't have a third man in.
Very interesting question. But I mean, a similar scenario is already eventuated with no shoulder charge, and yet, what do you do when it's 1-on-1? The only way to stop him is to sometimes throw your shoulder into it, which they do.
And they never get charged for that one.
Yeah. Well, big shout out to Billy Slater in 2018.
Well,
So
big shout outs to Jordan Ruppin at every tackle in the corner.
pretty much. So potentially it could be a case of that where, for the most part, players don't do it until it's in that try-scoring situation and then they jump in. Maybe that's still mitigation of a sort.
I reckon it's hard. I reckon. Trying to limit the number, and to be honest, there is there are some incredible tries where players will beat, or walk through. I mean, the
Fafita 2016 grand final.
even the Canberra Melbourne game, the first week of the finals.
Tapane.
Yeah, Tapane.
Oh, yeah.
Ran through 4 guys. They were all hanging off him as he smashed over the try line. Just like,
Great try.
I mean, those are entertaining to watch. So I don't know if I want to, I think it's a very hard area to police, and I think you get into this area where if you try and this is, I think where rugby has killed itself is they've tried to have a rule for
There's our
everything.
first one. It took a long time.
Ding, ding.
Hold on, wait a second. I'm just checking the time here. Yeah, 13 minutes. Well done,
I didn't
Xander.
have the bell ready. Damn
No,
it.
I was hoping for one of those dancing fish.
I mean, we're talking about over officiating, and rugby is a great example of it. It's
Yeah.
basically the sport that outside of the NFL has mastered creating rules for everything and an excuse to penalise anything.
Famously, there's 4 bureaucrats for every player.
I know I've banked on about this, but the game has turned into one long committee between officials.
Yeah, which I've always found the game of rugby union to be like that, to be a slightly more high-octane version of a council meeting.
People complain about NBA being like that with the amount of challenges.
timeouts,
The timeouts and challenges. But mind you, they've just changed the rules so that's minimising. I'd like them to go to fee. But anyway, sorry, let's not talk about NBA.
Yeah, mate,
Sorry.
we've already got one digression into rugby,
Sorry.
and you're taking that to fucking
Yep,
NBA.
I stop.
The difference is that those are timeouts, and what happens in union where they've created rules for everything, and their ability for their TMO to interfere is you basically have referees sitting there disagreeing with each other, trying to work out which penalty overrules which, and it just becomes like a
Because
farce.
every country has different, every ref has different rules, and every country they think about it
And
differently.
That is the problem, though, is you end up, and this gets back to Phil Gould and what he's always harping on about, and this is what he's
All
right.
roads lead back to
I know.
Gus.
But this is what he's right about: is that if you end up in a situation where you're trying to correct for everything, and basically the coaches will adapt to every rule change you make, and there will always be some unintended consequence. Then you then need to correct for again, and what you end up with is an increasing number of rules that create an increasing number of excuses to penalise, and just end up turning the game into something that you never really wanted it to be to begin with, just because you're trying to solve a very simple problem at the start.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So long story short, we should be very careful about trying to solve one problem, potentially creating a whole bunch more.
Well, yeah, the old-fashioned ripple effect, right? And I mean, I think for a lot of the purists, that's probably already happened to a certain degree. But for the most part, they're probably wrong, because if you think about the game, it's before our time. Maybe not you, Murray. I'm not sure, but the 1970s.
Before my time.
Yeah, before your time. Just to clarify, if you look at the footage of that game, it is so disparate to the game that we watch now. It actually is just a series of assaults that happen on the weekend, right?
It doesn't seem enjoyable to watch if you go back and watch those, in my opinion.
I mean,
We had
exactly.
kicking duels back then.
Oh, but Latrell tried to bring them back, and it was so good. And I'm so sad that it was such a shit kick that he really executed so poorly.
I was so happy when he did it. I go, we've got great field position. This
Yeah.
is amazing. We're playing the ball on the 40.
I mean, the idea. So it was a pre-planned thing. It was a pre-planned thing that Latrell
You know that?
did. Yes.
Yeah. I assumed it was,
I've
but-
been told some people that. it
Who's
was
your
a pre-
deep throat?
No comment.
Okay.
But
It's George Piggins.
But
anyway,
it
go
wasn't
on.
supposed to be Latrell doing the kicking, and that the circumstance wasn't on for him to do it then because there wasn't the space to kick it into, and then he did a shit kick as well. You think of it as a strategy. Quite often, they kick it, everyone runs forward. That was just because a rooster was kind of being lazy and stayed back, that he happened to be right there. As a strategy, they've
If you find turf. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, find turf and turn them around and get it back to their 20 or even their 10.
Totally.
My God, what a strategy.
Yeah, and you've got to have the boot to do it,
Yeah.
and you've also got to pick your time.
Yeah, see, if Matt Burton does it at the right time,
Yeah.
it's going to work. Cleary, DCE, the guys who've got the big boots. Latrell has got a boot. He just didn't execute it.
Yeah, exactly.
Storm have done this in a few big games when they had Addo-Carr.
You like kick on the second and third.
Yeah,
basically.
kick on the second
love
and
it.
third, and then Addo-Carr's just like burns everybody.
Oh,
for
Manly
speed.
did it last year with Jason Saab a couple of times as well, and it worked when he, wasn't just dropping everything by being near the ball. He could somehow drop it.
Yeah, we'll get on to Manly in a second.
Well,
but
must we?
look, while we're talking about Latrell, I'll start with you, Xander, here. I have mixed feelings towards Latrell, and I think a lot of Roosters players do, as someone that won a couple of rings with us.
And fans. Yeah.
And fans. To see him bask in the glory, how did that make you feel? You probably left the stadium. You went to the stadium and watched that game. I assume you trundled out with the rest of the Roosters fans and didn't stick around to watch, South fans bask in that assault.
No, I did not.
Funny that. But very famous footage has emerged after the fact where his image popped up on the big screen, and apparently it was a roar that you can't describe unless you were there.
Yeah.
Those moments, I am so split on that because I'm so feeling so burnt by the game, but I'm so weirdly happy for him. And for a player to have a moment like that is so rare. I can't take that off him personally.
It's like Beaver in the 08 grand final when he scored that try. It's probably the roar he got it for 80,000 people. Similar. Sorry, continue.
That's okay.
No, look,
not really, but
it's obviously as a Roosters fan, we have very mixed feelings about Trell because of what happened to Manu and all the rest of it. But I still have a soft spot for Trell. I mean, you get all the stuff about him being booed and the sideshow that aside.
I mean, you don't win 2019 if he's not there.
Yeah, 100% we don't. I mean, that he's pretty critical in that final try. Without him, we don't win it. And I do maintain. I remember when he left, I thought, geez, this feels like a mistake to let him go.
To let him go is kind of a loaded statement, right? Because
you look at what Souths have had to give up to keep him.
Yeah,
They've had to give up
and
their
we
halfback.
wanted to keep him.
Yeah,
it was an ongoing negotiation, and it seemed to fall apart. Now behind closed doors, I don't exactly know over what particular issue, but what I do know is very clearly. He had an extra passion to play for the South Sydney Strip because of his dad. Now, he plays like that. Like, if you ask me, he plays with more passion for South than he ever did for us, and he was great for us. But there's something extra in that jersey for Latrell Mitchell.
I think
it means
a lot
something
of it,
more.
I
It's
think a
something
lot
deeply
of,
emotional.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the fact that how much he values being Indigenous, and how Souths is clearly for a long, long time have been the club that have probably placed the most value towards Indigenous players.
For good reason. I mean,
Yeah,
when your
of
cultural
course.
home is Redfern, that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think that has meant a lot to a lot of Indigenous players, and
Yeah.
Latrell probably connects more closely with that heritage than a lot of players have. At least he appears to on the outside. I don't want to undermine other players and their connection, but he certainly displays it more openly. And I think, I think that's definitely part of why you'd want to go there. And you don't want to go to teams like Manly who just don't have any Indigenous players. We got rid of Kate Cuss, and now we have none.
To be fair, mate, the only time you did it, he stabbed someone. I'm going to edit that out. It was meant as irony. It didn't come across like that.
just came across as fairly malicious. But
We were just both like, whoa.
No, it was. But you've got plenty of players of colour, right? At Manly.
we
well,
do.
this is the thing, though. I mean, like the NRL famously is a very multicultural game. I mean, we were talking about this before.
Can you bring up for the pod
Yeah.
your conversation? You were reacting on Twitter to Andrew Webster's article.
Yeah, I think it's different. He had this article. Is this the NRL's Adam Goods moment? I said, well, no, it's not. I mean, there might be there might be some bigoted, idiotic fans who jump on this, but the NRL is a very multicultural game. 13% of it is Indigenous, 39% of it is Polynesian. If you're a racist who doesn't like brown people and you watch the NRL,
Don't say that word though.
You're on the wrong sport. You're in the wrong sport, right?
Yeah,
Thank you.
you are off your head. It is a game that really, and there's been a lot of players who are very celebrated with their Indigenous history. We're the first sport to have had an Indigenous captain for our national team.
Big Artie.
Yeah, great rooster.
Yeah. Just a great man.
And then Mal was another. Was Loz ever? captain?
I think he captained the Kangaroos.
Yeah.
Definitely
So
captained New
we've had
South
quite a
Wales.
few, for sure.
But yeah, no, I mean, long story short,
There's so much to be proud of there.
exactly. There's a strong heritage there, and the game has celebrated Indigenous stars. You know, you have the Indigenous All Stars as a concept. It's not something that they really have in other sports in the country.
Well, AFL would be too scared of that concept for it to get off the ground.
They probably would be,
Yeah.
right?
Can't do an Indigenous dance in AFL without the crowd getting on edge. Well, what's happening? Are they going to attack us?
Exactly, but it's something that the game has famously been fine with. So I don't think it's about, like, I honestly think this is very much down to the fact that the Roosters and Souths, we really genuinely dislike each other. It is not for show. It is very deep.
And do you know what here's the thing on the booing thing, and I felt like it undermined this historical hatred that the clubs have for each other for good reason, and there's lots of reasons we won't go into it on the pod. But it is also good for the game, I think, to have these kind of conflicts that happen between clubs.
It's why you had like 40,000 people 2 weeks in a row for the same game.
I love about Souths and Roosters, I do love the way the players seem to almost universally buy into the hatred. People who are bought from other clubs know history, but it's so pervasive within the club, and it's similar. Manly Storm have almost become that, but they're still certainly a step down. There's definitely just not the same hatred. When Roosters play South, it's just always a war.
And it's the reason why, and it's what happened when we went to play them in the final round. I'm like, geez, I really wish we just kept their powder dry and played a little bit ducks and drakes, but the teams would not have it. They would not go half-cocked.
This is my theory about it, right? And I think before the last couple of years, you could probably say the argument was South brought more emotion to the table, and we tried to play more footy. But I will say, in the last couple of years, I think it's the Roosters that have let emotion get to their heads. And we've actually played really, really dumb footy at critical times. So I think you could say that in the last game as well. And I find that really interesting because, that seems to be a pivot moment. Like I can't really put a finger on why that is.
You're suggesting that Robbo's lost the dressing room? Okay, he can come to Manly.
This is interesting, right? Because I think the first game where we played against South of Latrell for the very first time, this was sort of a new chapter in this book of feuds, right? Because this is a player that we loved. That, if you're going to read into the narrative, turned their back on our club and went to another club. And, this sort of heightened the tension between the two clubs. And that first game, I got the sense that Robbo probably did put too much of an emphasis on the passion because we started doing stuff in that game that I'd never seen before. We were, like biffs from the scrums, like sort of over-the-top dirty tactics. And I go, that's not, outside of Hargraves, it's not something that we're known for. And I think the Latrell Mitchell himself actually represents a new chapter in the story.
Oh, yeah, absolutely does.
And since he's gone there, and full credit to him, he's leveraging something there, they've been on top of us. And I think we've played dumber football and they've played smarter football. And I feel like that is an inverse of when we used to take them on before Latrell went there. That's just my take on it. But...
So what you're saying is Latrell is actually smarter than the entire Roosters organisation.
Look,
I'm okay with this.
Well, you know what? In the final round, Xander and I were there. Thanks again for the ticket, mate. That was a great game to go to, the opening of the brand new spanking stadium. And I think that there was more foxing going on from South in that game, particularly from Latrell. I think he was keeping his powder dry.
On TV, it looked
and
like that.
And he was prepared to get hammered for it because he knew it was pretty much superfluous and next week counted. And he brought his A game, and I have to give him full credit for that.
It's funny, though, because we were better at this before, you're right. I mean, the 2019 final round, we played South and then they beat us, and then we played them in the first week of the finals, and we pulled their pounds down by 30 points.
Happy at times, weren't
they? And, Luke Keary had a blinder, and it's interesting. This happened a few times we've played each other in the final round. I think it's across the board teams who play each other in the final round and then play. They always lose.
Manly Penrith 2017.
And it's just... the old adage, you learn more when you lose, I think is quite true. And it probably didn't help that Manu went down, because I do think that Manu in particular...
Significantly, yeah.
He was out to settle scores with Latrell. And you could
Breaking news, Teddy and Manu important to the Roosters.
Yeah, I know.
But he was exceptional in that last game of the competition.
So Manu
and he went after Latrell, it should be noted.
He was out to make a point, and he made it. Like every time, like there was a few times when Trell would do his thing where he'd bounce off players and he looked like he was going to make a break. As soon as he got an inch of space, Manu was out to smash him.
Grabbed him by the scruff.
Yeah. And it was as a Roosters fan, that was great fucking sport to watch, because it was those two who were great mates. One plays for the New Zealand Maori side when they have the Indigenous All-Stars game, and the
Yeah.
other plays for the Indigenous All-Stars as well. So they play on the opposite sides of that as well, but they also won 2 premierships together. It's a great rivalry between those two guys.
I enjoyed it just as much as you at the game, but for the record, you shouldn't have taken your pants off like that. I know you were enjoying it, and I don't know, everyone around seemed to enjoy it, but I wasn't a fan. As someone who's not a supporter, Mario, of either the Roosters or Souths, I'm interested to get an outsider's perspective here, and I don't just mean outside of the 8. Sorry, mate. I mean outsiders of this book of feuds. Do you, when you're watching this game, do you get buy-in? Like as a neutral fan, or do you is this purely manufactured by Souths and Roosters fans for you?
No, I don't think it's manufactured. If the game is intense, I buy into the intensity of a game, and any game will do that to me if you can feel the intensity, if you can feel the PASS, the wrong way to spell passion.
I thought you were trying to spell pain Haas.
No, the PASHUN. When they really when they get really into it, you get dragged in. Souths, Roosters drags me in. Dragons, Sharks tends to drag me in a bit. Cowboys, Broncos back from 2015 to about 2017.
There was a period there where those games were just
every game was
best.
1 point. Every game. And I remember Trent Slatts saying one time how he just always bet on full-time draw, and he made so much money in that period.
This
because
Brisbane
it was every
Cowboys?
time.
Yeah. I'd say that in the time that I've watched rugby league, that 3 or 4 year period of where it was the most consistent standard of AAA like rugby league that I've seen.
Yeah. Or was it 2018 when the Broncos beat you guys, Jimmy the Jet versus Latrell, that game?
Yeah.
I just saw that Jimmy the Jet try today. I saw it on Twitter, and I was like, oh my God, I love that try so much.
Yeah.
But I remember him and Latrell just going up against each other, but that was also the game when Napa did the whole leading with the head thing, and that was also the try when Asako cemented my place on Asako Island forever with that last minute try.
I know,
to win the
but
game.
he didn't do much since then.
Not
did
a
he?
lot.
That was the issue, but it was an amazing
It was
individual
like Michael
effort.
Cheekham when he won those 2 games in a row for the Tigers, and has
right.
done nothing since
Cheekham
then.
needed to retire then.
100%.
And then just lean on that
It
with
would
all
have
of
been.
his
He would have
relatives.
been the new Paul Osborne.
100%. Or what's the guy? Steve Jackson for Canberra in extra time in '89.
Like just super memorable moments, and you have those, and then unfortunately the rest of your career is just nothing. It's sad.
But obviously there are players that exist on the other side of that line, like Paul Carriage in '98. If anyone's familiar with the Canterbury Parramatta game in '98, I believe it was a prelim.
Or Wonga Blake against the Panthers last week.
Oh yeah, that was horrendous. Although he came back to form last week.
But if the Eels had lost this week, that performance would have been talked about for a long time. The fact that they've made it through.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, the Eels' last 3 finals wins spread out over a long time have been against 8th, 7th, and 8th. So
but this is the thing, and no one can deny it. They do generally outside of last week can play fairly well against the Panthers.
And
the supposedly unbeatable team of the last couple of years.
But they need to prove it against the Cows. They need to beat a team in the top 4 when it counts, because they just have never done it under Brad
I think
Arthur.
they will too, because also the Cowboys can't play in Sydney, it seems. They lost to us, they lost to South.
It's up in Townsville.
It's in Townsville.
Oh, it's in Townsville. Yeah, I suppose it would be because they won.
Yeah,
geez. Actually,
that makes it very interesting.
Yeah, it does. It might level it a little bit. It might level it a little bit, but I think Parramatta are a better team.
Well, and there was talk of there was an Eels injury. There was talk of
was that Mitchell Moses' ego? Because apparently copped a little bit of a bruise, but it's so roided that you'd have to kind of decapitate it to get rid of it.
Are we talking about Bronson Cherry? Or?
I saw some absolute munter on Twitter today suggesting...
Xander, can you take a note of the word munter? I want to use that more in future conversation.
It was Braden, and I don't hate Braden like some people do.
Who's Braden?
Cowboys fan.
Okay.
But he suggested...
Don't reference people that I don't know.
He suggested in all seriousness that the Eels, instead of... Opacek being injured, I think it was.
Oh, yeah.
So instead of bringing in like Bailey Simonson or someone, that he suggested they should move Dylan Brown to centre and have Jacob Arthur at 5'8".
Well, I hope you unfriended him. Because he's obviously having a series of mini strokes.
I think he has to have.
Yeah. No one would ever suggest that.
Dylan Brown at centre was a thing that Brad Arthur tried. It was stupid. We all knew it was stupid. And it failed horribly. Dylan Brown...
Can I one-up you there, Mario? Because under the great stewardship of Brad Fittler, when the wheels were coming off, in 2009, he experimented with putting Braith and Astor at fullback. Do you remember this, Sander? This was amazing. So he was the only guy that
blocked it out of my mind.
Was it last year that Granville played fullback for the Cowboys?
Oh, yeah, they did put him there a little
Yeah.
bit. That makes a bit more sense, though. Even though he's in his twilight of his career, he still has more pace than Braith did. Like in fullback, you need to have some pace.
Well, Braith's quick at attacking old people from Twitter via his Instagram.
Can you give the listeners... Like Mario's giving me a bit of a roundup because I haven't been on Twitter and any of the socials for quite a while. But apparently there was a lot going on here between Braith and Astor and some of the critiques that were made.
Alan
Katzman?
Katzman, yeah.
I've caught some of his tweets. He
Yeah.
seems to be he has impeccable grammar. I'll give him that.
He
And they're
does.
quite lengthy tweets. And they're normally, for anyone that is unfamiliar with his tweets, usually highlight something out of history. Like you might go,
Yeah, and there's
this is
usually
the
stats and
29th
stuff.
game that, two
But
wingers of the
basically,
Roosters have scored.
On Braith, Braith was on Fox on one of the panel shows. I don't watch them, so go away. But
Stealing Vonnie's jobs, go on.
Yep, exactly. And him and the other panelists were laughing at, I believe, Jamaica, one of the teams, but in theory, just the lesser teams from the upcoming World Cup. And Alan took to Twitter to quote tweet the Foxtel, thing talking about that and said, "This is absolutely classless." And he very politely but firmly just put them in their place, saying, "You guys are the host broadcaster for this competition. You should be talking it up, not mocking the teams." And Braith, very quickly, even though apparently he doesn't have Twitter, then highlighted this tweet on his Instagram with all sorts of like rude and abusive
Really?
text all over the top, including a vague threat of violence was in there as well. Like,
What?
the guy needs a good uppercut or something like that.
Well, that could be
It was-
it's
yeah,
an Australiana expression.
It was, but at the same time, this is an old bloke and this is
Yeah.
some knob on
Yeah.
on Instagram taking pot shots.
I hear you.
And
But
so Alan then,
that is not a literal expression.
yeah,
I mean, I'll
Alan
defend
then
him on that.
responded again, relatively quite politely to that, and Braith again went on the attack.
Yeah.
And then there was screenshots of a DM, of a Instagram DM from somebody, I don't know who, berating Braith for that, and Braith just saying, just basically saying, he can suck it. He should come and say it to my face, that sort of thing.
He's an old man, though, right?
Yeah.
But
this is
for
why
what, for what
shit
reason?
the shit Braith says account on Twitter is so
Yeah,
funny.
exactly.
Yeah, because oh my god, just the absolute.
I hear that upsets him a lot as well, by all accounts.
Yeah, look, we've I can give you some off the record screenshots there as well.
So something
he was
you-
not a fan of that account.
Something you guys were talking about off the air was about Souths and how proud they are of how many titles they've got. What was it you said, Xander?
Oh yeah, they're always talking about their 21 titles. And
Geez, Mario loves to rake up an old grave, doesn't he?
Yes.
He's trying. You know what he's trying to do, Xander? He's trying to stoke us into hatred, and it's worked.
Well, I mean,
Fuck
we
you,
did talk
Souths.
about Souths a lot, but in defence of your hatred of Souths, I think we could call them the Margaret Court of rugby league.
Oh, how so?
Well, they're really good at talking about
I
titles.
think we should just leave it there. Actually,
Yeah, I don't
Pack
think.
of homophobes.
I'm happy with Margaret Court of Rugby League.
I mean, I think if anyone wants to ask me on Twitter, I'm happy to justify it. But let's leave it there.
No,
I want to hear the reasoning, mate. Please go into it.
I think I understand where you're going with this.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, Margaret Court was winning titles against ping pong champions
So
and calling them Grand Slams.
are
No one from outside Australia could attend some of these Grand Slams. No professionals could play the games. She's getting walk-up
But
starts.
she still kicked their ass, mate.
But she's getting walkover starts like buys to get through to the second and third round. So it's basically like South winning the 1912 against Balmain by saying we won't turn up either and then just turning up.
So what you're saying effectively is that perhaps a grand final between Manly and, say, the Storm is probably a harder thing to win than South's beating Glebe or Sydney University in 1916.
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. When there's only, 8 teams in the competition.
Do you
and-
reckon the majority of our listeners would be aware of the forfeit incident? Who wants to furnish the room?
Surely
in that one?
most people would be at this stage.
Yeah.
I feel like it's common enough knowledge. But
I hope so, because we
Your-
are a niche podcast.
your
I think we
South-
attract hard heads.
I think
here.
with your South's hatred, you guys should be the ones to maybe.
Well, look,
talk
I don't
about
want to go right into this, but it's still a premiership that counts against their name, where essentially they convinced the opposition, which I believe was the Balmain Tigers at the time, to not turn up, and then they just turned up and claimed victory. Am I right, Xander?
More or less. I mean, so it was effectively a labour dispute where there was an agreement for.
It's
them
always
to-
a labour
yeah.
dispute.
There was an
Bloody
agreement.
lefties.
an agreement between the organisers at the time. I think it was to play an undercard game against for the grand final of the New South Wales Rugby League, to play as an undercard to a Wallabies v. I think it was a Wallabies v. I can't remember who it was, but there was a
Jamaica?
a promotional game the Wallabies were going to play.
Right.
And anyway, they were going to try and make some money by making an undercard thing. And so Balmain.
So what are they go, all right, let's go to the Tigers. I assume this is a sort of a conspiratorial, they're hatching a plan. They go to the Tigers and go, look, mate, no one's turning up to this thing.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it, because, there's going to be an undercard.
There's
we'll go to the pub and have a piss up later. But for now, just keep your powder dry.
So
it's fine.
it was meant to be, they're both going to boycott it out of protest, that they weren't going to be doing it. It was,
and then they just fucking turned up.
They turned up and kicked off to nobody and claimed the grand final.
See, I will say in defence of Souths there, though, that it is the most Balmain, or the most Tigers way to lose a grand final ever.
They should be saying Tigers Est, whatever it was, 19, was it 20 something? 19,
Oh,
was it the first
Yeah,
one?
they were a fan day.
Was it the very first game?
No, it was 1912.
The 1912, I thought so. Yeah, I was going to say Est 1912 always fucking getting rorted, because
Balmain were established. They were
mate, you just want to dup your microphone there.
Yeah. No, Balmain were a foundation club. They were established in 1908.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, that if you're going to start the momentum for where they got the thin end of the wedge, that might be a good year.
Yeah.
Mind you, that was a dominant period for Balmain. They won trebles.
Fucking, of course you know that, Xander.
They did. It's interesting. If you look back.
Well, I can tell you this: it was a Haysip Shotput who was excellent in the high jump in the 1912 Stockholm Games.
Another interesting fact that back then the biggest sport was rowing in Sydney.
You've done a bit of rowing, haven't you, Xander?
Yeah.
You got into that for a bit.
A little bit.
You're a bit of a journeyman when it comes to sport, aren't you, mate?
Not particularly good at anything.
Was
but
it
I
about-
had a crack
But
at
you
most
go
things.
in hard. I'll give you this. So for about a year, you go, what are you doing? I'm just running ridiculous lengths of kilometres, and then you go, I'm just swimming from the heads to heads at Coogee, and then I'm just rowing down the fucking Parramatta River for a year. I mean, it's not what most people do. Most people are lazy and they're out of shape, for example, like myself.
Yeah, look in the mirror when you say that.
Mate, don't worry, I was getting to the jibe very quickly. And but yourself, you seem to throw yourself into something for a year, and then you go, you know what I'm going to do next? I'm going to climb centre point.
From the outside?
From the outside,
Yeah.
obviously.
No, I prefer the lift, to be honest.
It's way more awkward on the inside because people get in the lift.
That's just the food at Sky Tower. But
I've never got the revolving restaurant appeal. I don't know if you guys have ever gone up there.
I have, but
I've taken clients there. It's not
It's not that great, is it? Like, the only thing that would be good is if
The
they
food is-
actually
the food
ramped
is
up the
awful.
speed and it was a bit more like the
Gravitron.
Gravitron.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
And food
You
was
could walk
sticking to the walls.
You could walk on the glass basically at that
That
point.
would be
And
amazing.
imagine walking on the glass as you're looking out over
Yeah.
hundreds of meters down at all the ants below, and you're suspended in the air. That would be quite an experience. I'm
But
up for that.
I'll say this. The moment there was a mechanical issue, then it's a fucking disaster, isn't it? Because-
Probably put a damper on the meal, I imagine.
But when is a theme park going to actually come to the party and create an elevated gravitron up in 100 meters up in the sky?
Won't they ever take any risks, Mario?
Far
Why
out.
won't they?
Dream World, step your game up.
Think of the kids, you cunts. So that's weird, bit of an overstatement. Okay, in terms of the finals, there's a game on now that we're about to watch. I want to get some predictions here. Now, obviously, we've got the Vermin playing Sharks. If we were going to just base this prediction purely on mascots, you'd imagine that a bunny would have, very little to say to the mouth of a great white, for example.
Except we're playing on the land, not in the water.
So
that
the
is
Sharks may
true.
asphyxiate this game. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
That's your
Or the
literal
rabbits
interpretation.
might breed inside of them and just burst them from the inside out.
Yeah, well, these are interesting predictions. But let's stick to the scores and the world of rugby league. We'll start with you, Mario. How's this game going to pan out?
Sharks are going to lead at halftime. I'm going to say 10-8. And then Souths are going to win with a try 2 minutes out to win by 4.
Who's going to score it?
AJ, of course.
Fucking, let's go on to that Johnson for a second. There's been a lot of wanking going on in the last couple of weeks for Alex Johnson.
I'm sorry, but consecutive years of 30-plus tries.
I get it.
There's got to be
I've-
some wanking.
I've seen the stats, but I'll say this, that, with that side of South, that left side being so potent, how many of those tries as a percentage do you think have been him just catching the ball and jogging leisurely over the line and putting the ball down? Now, he is the absolute beneficiary of this amazing attack on the left side, but should we be lauding Alex Johnson because it may potentially you know, a cardboard cutout with a little bit of gusto might have
Okay.
scored just as many tries.
You say that, but they
Just like
had
Jackson
one.
Paulo, apparently.
Yeah, well, if
But,
I
but
mean,
they had a cardboard cutout when they had Josh Mansour, and he did not score that many tries.
no, but they got, this is to be fair, they got the sauce well after his prime. Okay, the guy could barely move.
I know, but the idea that any idiot could do what AJ
Yeah.
does, the problem is they've had a couple of idiots there and they didn't do it.
No, he's a fine finisher. I think you can't undermine that. But I think it's the truth is somewhere halfway between what you're both saying. Is that he's definitely been the beneficiary of a very slick.
Of
back
course he
line.
has.
And, you know, he's not a winger that creates incredible tries himself. The way, you know, like
Yeah, he's not going to beat too many people one-on-one.
No, he's
That's
not doing
what
the
he does.
semi-Radradra sort of
Yeah,
length of
exactly.
field
He's-
tries
he's-
or whatever.
he's not-
That's
Yeah,
fine.
he's not going to assault someone in a Fijian resort,
But
is what you're saying.
he's a good defender.
Yeah.
He's good at diffusing bombs.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't do the yardage as well as some wingers, but
Yeah.
if the rest of his game is pretty bloody good and he can consistently, like a lot of the scoring 30 tries in a year is not fucking up. And the problem is, how many tries do most wingers just fuck up by just getting something wrong?
So is that why we're lauding a man, though? Because he doesn't fuck up?
If that's the level, if
Well,
everyone
it shouldn't
else
be the level.
but if everyone
you should
else
laud
fucks
someone
up-
because they're really good at something.
So yeah, I probably agree more with Eamon on this one. I think that he's been a very reliable player.
Yeah,
is what I would
safe pair
say.
of hands.
He's very safe. But you know, if you were to say in their prime, would you take him over their prime, Wendell Sailor or Lottie Takiri? I would no way.
These are the type of questions that are probably go more to the heart of the point. So we'll go to you again, Murray.
Well,
So who would you choose out of those selections? So you got Lottie Takiri, Alex Johnson, Wendell Sailor, or Brett Morris, for example. Who are you going? Give me a
Morris.
ranking.
Well, Brett Morris is number one.
Okay. Good
Out of
man. You can
those.
stay.
Ruben Garrick's number two.
He wasn't involved.
I'm putting him in there because I love Ruben.
You seem to have misheard the question. I didn't say who was the best wakeboarder in fucking Manly. I said who was the best winger out of those four. By the way, Ruben Garrick, very good winger.
Look, if you're putting on a game, you're probably picking Wendell or Lottie just to help you win that one game. But over a season, I'm taking Alex Johnson over both of them.
Yeah, I
Really? That's
I am.
intense.
Yeah.
Because
Think about
he's
those.
gonna
What
be
about the
there.
yardage game alone from
He-
those two guys?
But okay, Wendell
Kick
couldn't-
returns.
Wendell wasn't much of a jumper. He was, like you kicked to him, he wasn't doing a whole lot in the air.
Lottie was.
Mate, but they both did huge amounts of yardage work.
Okay,
They were
but
like extra forwards.
I remember John Hopper-Whitey out jumping Wendell Sailor and running 80 metres to score. Like Wendell had a big weakness.
Yeah, but he was running from the police at the time. You can't count that, all right? Because he had 4 or 5 warrants.
Yeah,
Do you
no,
remember that?
Okay, but
He also got banned for 2
I'm
years
putting
for
Johnson
cocaine.
there because he's playing your 25 games of the season. He's not getting done for cocaine. He's not fucking off to play rugby. He's going to be there when you need him.
Do you know
to
why
be
he's
there.
playing 25 consecutive games, though? Because his game is nowhere near as robust as the guys
That's
we
right.
mentioned.
Okay, and
He's
the
not
same
putting
can
his
be-
body on the line
So
in
the same can
way.
be said of Cam Smith.
That's true.
Would you take Cam Smith over almost any other hooker in history? Yes, you would, despite the fact that he didn't play tough. He didn't play the way that
I don't know about
It's-
not tough.
So a
he was
hooker is
third man in every
a
tackle.
hooker
Go
is
away.
fundamentally different to a winger. I think, because your hooker in the modern game is almost an organizer. A winger is not that. You do need wingers to do more.
The thing is, this is the thing where you have a ghost of a point there in the sense that Cameron Smith was a genius at not putting his body on the line in the same way that, say, you'd contrast Alex Johnson with a Wendell Sailor. But he brought so many more aspects to his game.
He was a game manager. Alex
He
Johnson
game managed,
is
exactly. He was
not
another
managing
halfback.
the game.
Well, I want to know. I don't know anything about Ken Irvine specifically. Was he? You hear about him as the guy who scored the tries. I know nothing about his game. No one talks about that. Alex Johnson, in a way, is the perfect person to take over from Ken Irvine because he's going to be remembered as the guy that scored all those tries. No one's going to talk about any individual
But
aspects
yeah,
of his game.
if you were to put the kind of question I have about him is if you were to put Alex Johnson in Wests, what is his try scoring strike rate going to look like? I think if you were to put Lottie Takiri, in his prime in almost any side, he's going to do damage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're probably right there.
Yep.
But are they winning any more games? I don't know.
I don't think you can underestimate just how important it is to have giant bodies returning the ball. Like, as Roosters fans would know, Daniel Tupou, I think if you're not Roosters fans, you go, yeah, he's a pretty good finisher and he's good in the air. But Roosters fans go, no, it's his kick returns and his constant yardage.
Well, look,
Yeah.
as
where
far
he
as
makes a minimum of 10 almost every run he makes. That's because he's giant and robust.
But okay,
it's
as
something
far
that
as
an Alex Johnson wouldn't
But
offer
as far
you.
as Lottie Takiri goes, if you got a game in a shootout and you need your winger to score a hat trick, Lottie's not your guy.
But if
Because
you're in
he
a game
never
where
scored a hat trick.
if you're in a game where it's really tight and close, Alex Johnston's probably not scoring a hat trick either. You know, how many tries did he score in the grand final against Penrith?
Okay, yep, and South didn't play that well that game.
Yeah.
It's just how it
Like
is.
in an arm wrestle, is he that effective?
Yeah,
I
maybe
don't
not.
know if he is.
But the thing is, he's effective in the system that he's in.
Yeah,
So whether
yeah.
or not he'd be great for a different
So, yeah.
team almost doesn't matter because of how great he's been for that team.
Yeah, my theory about him is he's always been a bit of a flat track bully. If the side's on the back foot, he just is invisible utterly.
Look, to me, he's almost like a tradesman, right? Like he's so good at being in that right place at the right time for that system. Like he doesn't tend to fuck that up very often. He's got a very high percentage of being, you know, this play that, you know, it's almost a replication, but they're very, very good at it when they come to that left side. And for that, I commend him. Like, and of course he's reaping the benefits, right? Like in statistically. But yeah, you won't convince me that,
Well,
you know,
look
he's
at
someone that I'd take above more than just the four we've mentioned. I think to me, he's actually a mid-ranger.
That's fine. I just want to look at the game last night. So something that Alex Johnston does spot on is he positions himself exactly where he should be.
Yeah.
And
I'd agree with that.
how many wingers get that wrong and fuck up tries?
Yeah.
Just last night, Gutho in support of Dylan Brown.
Canberra
of
had a shocker.
That amazing Dylan Brown run he's done. And Gutho, your job is to run behind the guy with the ball.
Wasn't forward though.
Yes, it was.
I don't reckon it was forward.
The pass was forward. It was no try.
It was flat as attack.
Gutho was standing literally side by side in line with him. They're running at full speed. It's impossible to pass the ball backwards to a player running.
But the float. That's why the floating forward rule exists,
Yeah,
because of
exactly.
physics.
But I don't care.
Has to go out.
Well, you have to care about physics,
it
Mario.
went in front of him. It had to go forward. It had to be.
I don't think he was in front
it,
of him.
Was it backwards out of the hands?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To
Well,
me,
look,
it didn't
we
look
could get
it.
bogged down here, but
To
I mean,
me, as
it was
he
very
passed
close.
it, I said this is going to be forward, but he'll get away with it. And the ref did the right thing and called it, as far as I'm concerned. You can disagree, and that's fine.
Lads, this has been awesome, but we probably need to watch some football. We're about to watch this footy game on delay. This has been amazing. Thank you very much, everyone at home. If you have listened, I don't know if you've unsubscribed. You probably have, and for good reason, because it's been many, many months since we've been here, and we apologise for that. It was all of Mario's fault. He just said, I'm not recording, and fuck you until you pay me.
You should join the Republican Party with that sort of revisionism.
All right. For the record, it was me because I've had a child. And speaking of which, let's finish with a weird anecdote. So today has nothing to do with football. So if you want to tune out now, please do so. But we took Charlie to a park, my son, and I sat down. I had all of his stuff while my wife played with him on the equipment. And then suddenly I realised I was on a bench and I had all of this stuff. And then I looked around and I couldn't see my wife or Charlie. And I go, what's happening? Now suddenly people are kind of looking, I feel like they're looking at me going, why is this middle-aged guy sitting at a children's park where he's got like...
With a bottle of wine.
Yeah, and I look like a hobo, as I do all the time.
And where's his right hand?
Yeah, and I just was so affronted by all of these weird looks that I thought, fuck it, I felt obliged.
Jesus!
Well, I didn't enjoy it.
You cannot put that to air. You have to cut that out.